Greetings, Coley Aziza here with Mariama Learning, where we support early learners' needs. Coming to you in my car again. I really like coming to you in my car. I like the lighting in my car. I really want to get this video out to you. School has begun. We are in early October, and I think it's very important that we get this information out about IEPs. I told you in your last video, when we talked about child find, that the next video would be about the IEP, because once your child is found to have needs, once the team has assessed and determined that your child has needs, they may recommend moving on into either an IFSP for our infants and toddlers or an IEP for our children 3 and above. Now, I'm going to talk about the IEP today. So the IEP stands for an Individualized Education Plan. There are many parts, let's say that. There are many parts of the IEP. And so I don't want to overwhelm you. So I'm going to take time in different videos to talk about the parts of the IEP that I think are most important, that we can really go into and discuss and review. So I wanted to start today talking about the eligibility page of the IEP. Now, depending on what state you're in, on what jurisdiction you are in different states, your IEP may look different, but there are going to be parts of the IEP that need to be there. So I looked at an IEP from DC Public Schools, looked extremely different from Prince George's County the IEP document that Prince George's County Schools uses. However, it had a lot of the same information. Pretty much just looks different. It may be formatted different. So when I say the eligibility page, if you're living in California, that page may have a different name. Okay. But in Prince George's County, the eligibility page has everything that you need to know about what you came to the team, what areas of need you came to the team with. What were your areas of concern? What were your areas of concern? So it might have been the cognitive area. It might have been the social emotional area. So those will be listed on the eligibility page. What were the areas of concern when the child first came to the team to ask for, when the parents first said, oh, I think there's a need here? What areas did we assess? What areas were the areas of concern? Now, once the team assesses, just because those were areas of concern doesn't mean that your child had delays in those areas. So you might have come to the team and said, okay, I have a concern about their social emotional skills. I have a concern about their cognitive or pre-academic skills. I have a concern about their speech language. The team may only find, once they test, that your child has the delays that warrant an IEP and warrant services in the speech language area. And that, yeah, they may have some things that they're not able to do in the pre-academic or cognitive area, but they're not that far behind. They may have some areas in the social emotional area that they may not have all those skills that are age appropriate, but they're not that far behind. But in speech language, yes, we see that there is a significant enough delay to recommend that they receive an IEP and receive services. So all of that will be listed on the eligibility page. What areas were the first areas of concern, and then what areas were the areas that we actually found the delay. This page will also list the tests, the assessments that were given, and the dates that they were given. This area will also list the dates when the team has met. And this is important because it is your child's right to have a 3-year reevaluation. And you have to have the proper dates on that page to determine when your child will receive their 3-year reevaluation. So these dates will be on there. The date that the child was tested, and then the date that the team met to review the test results may be on there, and then also the date of the IEP meeting. And that is pretty much what's going to be on the eligibility page. Pretty much the areas of concern, the areas that the team actually found had delays, the specific dates of the testing, the specific dates when the team met, and also the names of the tests, and there was something else that I wanted to say that came to me as I was speaking that I think I am leaving out. The test results, it will also list that. The actual scores. And I think that pretty much sums up the eligibility page of the IEP. Next, we'll move on to what we call the present levels. Again, if you're somewhere else in the country, this area might be called something else. But there is going to be an area which lists your child's present levels, and I'll explain what that is. Okay, so before we move on to the present levels, let me say this about the eligibility page. So again, it might have a different name depending on where you're at, but the page that basically is going to go over what your initial concerns were for your child. Once your child has a reeval, that page will need to be updated because now they've had their reeval. So the dates, the initial dates that were on there will change because now your child has had their reeval, and also there's been updated testing. So the updated testing needs to go on there as well. Now that they've had a reeval, and the areas of concern may be different because, your child may not have the needs anymore. And if they don't have needs anymore, then they will no longer need an IEP, but they may not have the same needs anymore, or they might test age appropriately in some areas and then still have some concerns in other areas if they continue to have an IEP. So that eligibility page is very important. And now we can move on to the present levels. Now, why is this area that I'm calling the present levels important? Because what needs to be listed on there, again, if your child is just coming into having an IEP. So if this is an initial IEP, those scores and those tests that are listed on the eligibility page are also going to be listed on this present levels page. If your child now has been in the program and this is not an initial IEP, those initial scores can be listed, but then we also need updated testing every year because the IEP will last for the year, right? It goes from, let's say, today's October 7th. So it will be, let's say, October 7th, 2024. We know then October 6th, 2025, this IEP, is expiring, right? And we have to start a new IEP. We have to update it. We have to update the IEP. So the IEP lasts for a year. So we should always have updated information in the in the IEP every year. Now, do we need to do this battery of testing like we do initially when the child first comes in and when they have a reeval? No, we don't need to do that. You can do different type of testing. You can do different types, of testing. You can do observations. You can do developmental checklists. It would depend on what is the criteria in your state or jurisdiction. But your child does not need standardized testing every year, but they do need testing in the areas of concern once a year. So now, what is the difference between standardized testing and let's say a developmental checklist? A developmental checklist is just what I'm saying that it is. It's a listing of developmental of skills developmentally. It will have skills in the different areas that we're talking about: social, emotional, cognitive, fine motor, right? So it will have all these skills listed, and it will list them developmentally. And then you can complete these checklists and say, oh, what can my child do? What can my child, and the teacher can do that. Or you can do it together. Because the teacher's going to have to ask you, because some of the things the teacher may not see at school, and those developmental checklists are things in early childhood or assessments that we use that are not standardized, that we use to update where they're at in their present levels once a year. The standardized test is a test that compares the child to their age mates. It's not looking at a developmental checklist and seeing where they're at. It's comparing the child to how other children scored on this test. That is a standardized test. When the child comes in initially, when they have an initial IEP, that's what we're giving. We're giving them more of the standardized test. I'm not saying we're not observing them and writing down our observations and, of course, looking at them through a developmental lens, because this is early childhood, and I think we should look at all humans from a developmental lens. But sometimes we forget about that once they leave early childhood, and we're not always addressing people's needs developmentally. But that's a whole different story, right? We could go on and on about that. So that's the difference between the standardized and the non-standardized test, and the observations and developmental checklists that we will have every year when we update the child's IEP. You do not need to do the standardized tests. You do that when they first come in, and then also during a reeval. But we want all data. We want data from families, from mom and dad, from grandma. We want that data to help us, because there's things that you may see that we may not see. And observation is extremely important, and collecting data is extremely important on a daily basis. We need to be collecting data so that we can share the data with you, and also update their IEP every year to put down exactly where the children are. So this is what should go in the present levels. All of that, right? The standardized testing, if we're giving standardized tests, if we're updating for the year, we're going to have what we find on our developmental checklists and our observations, our classroom observations. Also, we want to list what kind of supports we give that child in the classroom. It's extremely important, again, because if the child moves, if your children move, the family moves from one place to the next, from one state to the next, from one jurisdiction to the next, we want the teachers that are working with them and the specialists that are working with them to really understand where this child is at and what this child needs. So the supports that are given to this child in the classroom, it's important that we list that we list what the child is doing once we have them and we're working with them, that we list what they're doing, that we list the supports, because those supports will be listed again in another portion of the IEP. The IEP needs to be a very fluid document that almost, it connects like a puzzle. That's the way I like to look at it. So if I say in the present levels that this child requires, let's say, and this child benefits from modeling, and I'm just using this as an example, and visuals, then it would be great to list this again in the portion of the IEP where it says what kind of supports this child needs. That's a good IEP to me, where you're making sure that everything connects. That if I've listed that there, then I'm listing it again. And then it will be very clear to whoever is working with this young person that this child needs that. Oh, okay, they listed this in the present levels. Oh, modeling really works with them. And then you list it again in the area where you have supports, so that a person won't miss that. It's very clear, whoever's working with them. And then especially if they leave, because lots of times, teachers can talk to one another if they're working in the same school, but if they leave the school and they go to another school, or if they leave, the state and they go to another state, that the IEP is written so clear that any team will understand what this child needs. So again, in present levels, you need to have the testing that is done. If it's an initial IEP, you will only have the test that you just assess them with. You list that. You list the observations that you had while testing. If it is a IEP that is a continuing, then you're going to list the classroom observations and any developmental checklists that you have done for that year to update the IEP. And you also want to list the supports that are given in the classroom, so that whoever's working with the child will know what your child benefits from, or what the young person benefits from. The other thing you want to list is this an area of concern? Because you might have tested in that area if it's an initial IEP, and you list the test results, but it's not an area of concern. So there will be an area in that portion of the present levels that says, no, this is not an area of concern. If you've tested and it is an area of concern, then you will list that is an area of concern. And how will we address, or you will state that, and how will we address this if it's an area of concern? Are you going to address it by goals? Are you going to write a goal for this area? Or are you going to offer supports in this area? Certainly, if you have a goal, you will offer supports. But sometimes you won't have a goal. You'll just say, oh, you know what? We're going to make sure that we have this particular thing in place for this child. So we will list that in supports. For example, if your child has difficulty transitioning, there's something that we call a first then board that helps them transition. It's a visual board that helps them understand, okay, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. You might list that in supports, right? And so we're not going to write a goal for that because they have difficulty transitioning. We're just going to list that a first then board needs to be used with this young person. All right. So present levels have a lot of things. It's a big part of the IEP. It's the meat of the IEP, even though there's other parts too, like the goals, but it's a huge part of the IEP. You're listing again the results of the test again, and also who tested this child, right? So you're listing that. You're listing the results. You're listing who gave the test. You're listing, again, if it's an initial, the standardized test. If it's a IEP that's continuing, classroom observation, and developmental checklists. You are listing what supports this child benefits from. If it's a IEP that's continuing, you're going to list if this is a need or if it's not a need, whether it's an initial or continuing, because your child, the team may feel like this is not an area of need anymore, based on the developmental checklists and the classroom observation. Your child is age appropriate. They're functioning age appropriately. Now, what happens with that is then the team may decide that if the young person is looking like they're age appropriate, you may have to do a standardized test because they were found eligible and now it looks like they are not eligible anymore based on classroom observation. And so we need to do a standardized test again, just to make sure that the child, that your young person, or that the young person is no longer requiring this service. And so anyway, all of that needs to be listed on the present level portion of the IEP. So it's a lot that needs to be on there. Now, before I end this video, I just want to say how important IEPs are. For those that are writing the IEPs, it can be a lot. It's a lot of paperwork. The way I got through it as an educator is that I always, I took pride in writing an IEP. It's very important. Of course, parents, you are part of the team, so you need to collaborate with the teachers in writing this. Now, you might not feel like, I'm not an expert, but you are an expert about your child. And so teachers will be asking you and should be asking you what you see at home so that they can add what you're saying about your child and what you observe to the IEP. I look at it as a educational plan, just like a doctor writes up a medical plan. This is an educational plan. It is individualized education plan, right? And so I'm an educator, but I looked at it as almost like I'm writing up an education plan like a doctor would write up a medical plan. This is, really important, and all these pieces need to fit together so that we can meet these young people's needs. And I got very excited about it. It can be overwhelming when teachers are inundated with so much paperwork. So that's a whole nother piece. Teachers need to be given the time to do these IEPs, but it is of great importance. And parents, do not be intimidated. That's one of the reasons why I'm writing. Let me not say do not, but I'm making these videos because I want you to not be intimidated and to really understand the IEP process. There are times that I've worked with parents and they've said, you know what, working with you on this IEP, this is the first time I've understood it. Because people come at them. I'm sorry, I apologize, educators, but sometimes we come at families with all of this language that may not be familiar to them because it's educational language in our field and they may not be familiar with it. And we just talk at them and we may not always include them. And then families, you may already feel intimidated. And so it's just an overwhelming experience and you just may tune us out. And so I'm sharing these videos so you can really just know more about the IEP and not feel intimidated by it. And, this is your child's education plan. And if they need it, you want to be as involved as possible. You're a part of the team and, you should feel like this is what we do. If your child is receiving services, and we're going to sit down and we're going to work together. We're going to create this plan for my child. So that's it. Thank you, friends. Today we talked about the IEP. The two parts that I wanted to start off talking about are the eligibility page, which I discussed, and the present levels. And again, those names may be different if it depending on where you are, but they're going to have that information that the description describes. How is your child eligible to receive services? So the eligibility page and the present levels. What is your child doing? What is your child doing? What are developmentally, what are they doing? What are their scores? What is the a developmental checklist or a standardized test? What is the observation? What are they currently doing in the classroom? And what are the supports that your child is being given? And what supports benefit them? What helps them, achieve and function in the classroom at the highest level? All right, so this is Koli Aziza with Mariama Learning, where we support early learners' needs. I'll be back again discussing the next parts of the IEP that I think are really important for you to get more information about and feel strong about in your understanding of them. Thank you.